Digital platforms have grown significantly in recent years. We all think of brands like Booking, Airbnb, Deliveroo, or Uber. These digital platforms are developing especially in highly fragmented markets. Markets where the economic player has very little market power, meaning they have no control over either price or demand, and they are even less able to collect information about demand that would allow them to guide their strategy. The business models of these platforms are fundamentally tied to their ability to capture both sides of the market simultaneously. On the demand side, this is achieved through the use of very large advertising budgets and also by designing particularly user-friendly interfaces as well as mobile applications. On the supply side as well, continuous efforts are made to offer additional services that benefit the sellers. This is why we talk about a two-sided market, consumer and producer, or even a three-sided market in the case of platforms like Deliveroo or Uber, where there is also a third community, either the delivery drivers or the drivers. At the beginning of Uber's development, significant efforts were made by the platform to recruit drivers with the promise of particularly high commissions. What was observed later, when the critical mass of drivers had become large enough, is that the platform drastically and unilaterally decided to reduce the commission rate for drivers. And we can imagine the consequences this may have had on the personal and professional choices of those drivers. The strategy of the platforms is obviously to maximize the number of transactions and therefore the commissions they receive. The main mechanism to achieve this is, on the demand side, to constantly instill a bit of marketing stress. We are all familiar from using these platforms with messages like warning, last room available at this price. On the supply side, the mechanism for organizing stress is a bit more complicated, but it also aims to encourage the provider, for example, a hotel, to systematically market its offer, that is its rooms, through the platform rather than through another channel or directly to the customer. The influence of these platforms on markets is multifaceted and still quite poorly understood. On the demand side, we particularly notice that in the case of meal delivery platforms, the range of choices is more limited than at the restaurant itself if you were to go there directly. More fundamentally, still on the demand side, what we observe is that platforms systematically tend to standardize and simplify the description of the services being sold in order to make the purchasing process easier. And we understand that for users such as people with disabilities who are particularly concerned with obtaining more detailed information about service descriptions, well, their satisfaction will be much harder to achieve. On the supply side, the effects are much deeper. Indeed, as transactions pass through them, platforms accumulate a real wealth of information, which allows them, for example, to know over the long term that the trend in a place like La Rochelle is more toward consuming 3 cheese pizzas rather than calzones, and the opposite is true in La Baule. More seriously, these platforms will be able to observe that for a specific tourist destination, the trend for the summer of 2023 will see an increase in visits from German customers rather than Belgian ones. In conclusion, what has been little studied so far in the case of digital platforms is the potential intermediation bias that will work to the detriment of sellers. We have seen that with the informational capital they accumulate, platforms are able to very precisely anticipate changes in demand. But it is not necessarily in their interest to communicate these trend observations to sellers, because this directly conflicts with their business model. We can therefore see that the question of the economic effect of digital platforms on markets and territories in the case of tourism is still far from being resolved.